Well, culture of integrity, what does it mean? It means that you take a moment where you're preferably not in a crisis and your brain has its full stress-free capacities, and you anticipate what are the issues we are dealing with.
Welcome to Compromising Positions. I'm Leanne Potter, cyber anthropologist and head of security operations for a major retailer.
And I'm Jeff Watkins, a cybersecurity enthusiast and CTO for a major tech consultancy. Together, we're the tech podcast that asks non-cybersecurity professionals what we in the industry can do to make their lives easier.
And help make our organisations more prepared to face ever-changing, human-centric cyber threats. We've had quite the response to our first episode back. Thank you so very much for all your kind comments, listeners. We agree, Bettina is awesome.
She is, and do go back and check out the last episode if you missed it. In the meantime, Bettina Palazzo, leading business ethics expert, is back in this episode of The Dilemma Game, unleashing the power of ethics and good cybersecurity through play. In this episode, we'll dive into a topic that touches every aspect of our lives, yet remains kind of largely unspoken: power dynamics in the workplace and beyond.
We'll also explore how companies handle crisis of ethics, the impact of regulations, and the real weight of company culture in defining our work environments.
Plus, we'll tackle a big question. Whose job is it to ensure cybersecurity? Is it the organisation, the regulators, cybersecurity teams, or every individual?
And we've got a special treat for you. We'll introduce the Dilemma Game, a fascinating tool that brings policy discussions to life, helping teams navigate the grey areas of real-world scenarios.
Can't wait. Well, we love this chat, and we think you will do too, so sit back and enjoy our interview with Bettina Palazzo.
So we also need to work on an individual level, but also on a company level. How do we deal with power? If you have a company that has all these perks for leaders, from the special parking spots to bonuses, and so these status symbols change all the time. Now you have the fanciest e-bike or the coolest tech gear. Taking care of that your leaders don't get this power intoxication is an important part. And so I'm a big believer in the power of personal ethics, but if the context is also very important, and it's very hard to stay ethical if your context is pushing against it. If you have a very cutthroat incentive system, you can write about cooperation and teamwork until you're blue in your face in your value statements. It won't help, because this tone from the structure is always more powerful.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's why quite a lot of cybersecurity initiatives fail. So you see big companies, I'm not going to name anyone because I don't want to get into trouble, but big companies, and that when they have a breach, and there's been a few where they've done an investigation, they said, well, it's down to really toxic culture. And I think if you've got a culture that prioritizes delivery at all costs, and that says, okay, no, we need to ship out this latest product, this latest feature, and to hell with security because security will slow us down, then you're going to see those behaviours proliferate, because those behaviours get rewarded up to a point until something goes wrong, don't they? We need to ship out this new product as quickly as we can because, one, it'll make the stockholders happy, make the boss happy, I'll get a big bonus for doing it. But those incentives, those short-term incentives, often lead to eventually really bad practices and people justifying their actions and saying, no, I've been told I need to keep working at this pace, and therefore considerations like security kind of go through the wayside. So
it's kind of endemic. Look at the financial crash. That was all of their risky investments and subprime deals were all encouraged up until the point all the money was gone, and then suddenly the regulators were in, and we have things like MiFID came in. It's really interesting to see that not much changes really.
Yes, because the culture stays the same. They just glue more regulation on top. And especially since you mentioned the banking industry, I mean, they have very sophisticated systems of compliance, but their level of fines didn't really change in the last 10 years.
That's very true for cybersecurity as well. So I can't remember the article, but I'll link it in the show notes when I find it. But it showed a graph, and basically what it showed, and please listeners, don't take this as this is what you should be doing, but it showed that when a company has a very public breach, yes, there is a dip in the stock prices for that organization, but as long as they're showing willing and proof, that actually has a very short-term impact, and you see actually a lot of companies not only go back to where they were in terms of their sort of stock holdings, but slightly above as well after they've had a breach. Now, I always say that a breach is sometimes good for business because the security teams are often the most underfunded teams, and a breach usually leads to more money. It's not ideal. It's not how I like to operate, but sometimes it it is good for business. But I'm thinking as well about a case recently that came to the ICO. So that's the commissioning board that fines people for data breaches. And recently they fined a company who an extra 1 million on top of the 3 million fine they got for just it being a data breach. And that extra 1 million was due to the fact that they had good policies on paper, but they didn't stick to them. And so the ICO was, in effect, punishing this organization, and rightly so, punishing this organization for saying, you're just paying lip service to policies. You have them written down. Nobody knows where they are. Nobody's following them. And things like that. And I think actually things are turning. You have to be really active. You can't just write it down anymore. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yes, we can see if you can look at whatever scandal in compliance or data breach or whatever, you will always find certain context factors like performance pressure, time pressure, authority pressure. My boss told me so. Everybody's doing it. Yeah, so you always find that, and that's why these things they always come back. It's not like in boxing where you say they never come back. In compliance and data breach, they ever come back, right? And we also see that the authority you mentioned has seen that also the regulator should stop just saying, okay, just show us your policies and you're good. Also the American Department of Justice recently announced that they will look into, is your program actually effective? And that creates a lot of hustle and bustle in all companies, because now they need to become more serious about implementation. And in a way, I understand it that if you write a policy, it can take forever. Everybody wants to change something to the last word, and then everybody is exhausted at the end, and they don't have the budget or the energy to really get into the implementation. And as you said, the budget problem is the same for compliance. If you have a scandal, then you can you have a wonderful budget in compliance, but as soon as this is taken care of, you have to struggle for your budgets again. And probably it should be possible to kind of make this a little bit more stable, right?
Following off on that, we mentioned a lot about the regulators, the organizations. I mean, whose responsibility is it to protect customers? Is it the organizations, the cybersecurity team, the regulators, the government, or is it down to the individual? Like, where do you lie on that?
Yeah, that kind of creates a flashback for me when I started with the whole field. And back then in Germany, in business ethics, the theoretical, all the professors there, they had this big fight. So where is the responsibility? And I wrote my PhD on the intercultural differences. And it's actually very cultural, where you think ethics should the main responsibility should lie in Europe, especially in Germany, with our bad experience on relying on individual ethical heroes didn't really work out so well in our history. So we have this tendency to mistrust individual motivation and also implementation power in ethics. So we will always want to push it to the regulators, to the collective part. And then it's more or less a thing between the government and the companies. And in the US, on the other hand, it was the other way around. Of course, the good old tradition of rugged individualism and the hero rides into town and saves the day. But also there, in the last 20 years, so the both sides were kind of approaching each other, because in the US, they, with all the scandals that keep coming up, they had to understand, well, maybe there's also something systemic behind it why this doesn't work. And the thing, if you do it too systemic, it's very slow, and you're not in touch with the issues that are popping up, emerging issues that is only what the companies see. So that's their responsibility. And a lot of things have changed in the last 20 years, but a lot stay the same. In the beginning, I was still more on the side on, yes, let the companies do self-regulation, but that didn't really work that well either in the last 20 years. So now I'm a big fan of, well, we need some certain regulations, but give companies the space to do it in a way that's fit for them, so we don't have this one size fits for all kind of thing. It's still a challenge.
Your point earlier about the way countries approach things like ethics and perceptions of risk reminded me of a podcast I listened to recently, and it was a great podcast. I highly recommend it, and it was called How to Fuck Up an Airport, and it was about the Berlin airport.
Oh yeah, oh
yeah. I knew you'd know what I was talking about. But there was a line in it, so it was going through how did this project fail and catastrophically fail. And there was one interesting line, and I think it's actually in the transcripts of the discussions the Berlin project sort of discussed, and it was, well, in Germany we don't believe people are corrupt. We don't have corruption in Germany, and that's why we didn't believe that anyone would. One of the main issues was a lot of backhanded deals with vendors and things like that, and lots of people in parliament sort of having their friends bid for the contract and win and things like that. And I just think it was just such an interesting understanding of how ethics and risk can come into play. Like our stance as a nation, which was interesting, our stance as a nation is that corruption doesn't exist.
If I remember right, studies say that people lie and cheat all over the world. But on the other hand, we have the Transparency International survey every year where they kind of rate countries from less corrupt to more corrupt. But I guess in general, corruption can show up differently in different countries.
Yeah, and I think there is why it kind of resonated with me, that kind of line, just because quite a lot of businesses, are international. So when I'm thinking about sort of cybersecurity posture, then you've got to create a cybersecurity policy, processes for all these cultural nuances. If I'm the global CISO, so Chief Information Security Officer, for big, huge international company, is my cybersecurity policy is going to work in America just as well as it works in China, just as it works well in England, in Germany, wherever it is? How do I even tackle that problem, Bettina, if I'm going to create a policy? You've said many times throughout this conversation that one size fits all approach doesn't work, but how would I go about then if I want to be the best global CISO I can be? How would I go about understanding those cultural drivers?
Yeah, I guess that there is no magic bullet there. It's a question of balancing. So you do want to have some general lines that nobody will hopefully cross internationally, and you need to communicate it. But then you also need your local knowledge, because things are differently culturally, technologically, legally, and and keep the conversation going. And again, you need to adapt locally as much as possible, and still trying to keep it all together.
So you work a lot with compliance managers to create a culture of integrity. Can you tell us more about that, and how would a security team go about establishing something similar?
Well, culture of integrity. What does it mean? It means that you take a moment where you're preferably not in a crisis, and your brain has its full stress-free capacities, and you anticipate what are the issues we are dealing with, what are the most important ones, what are the most dangerous ones, because you usually cannot deal with everything at the same time, and you decide what are our boundaries, because integrity means that I stick to a principle, a rule, a value, no matter what, even if it would be very beneficial or profitable for me to not do it. And this is where you need to sit down and in cold blood and do some deep thinking, because what often happens, we need to normalize ethics and compliance in business, because what happens if there's an ethics problem popping up? Oh no, what can we do? And then usually it's something that is not really a surprise. Yeah, if you sell interception software to an oppressive regime and you have not done your due diligence because the dollar signs in your eyes were too strong, then you should not be surprised if you get hit with a shitstorm. So try to prepare these things, do a good risk analysis before, and decide how you want to deal with these things. And you should not leave your employees alone, because that's also not an ethical thing that's sometimes done by companies, that they say, oh, especially in banking, oh, these are just some rogue traders. The rest of us is great. Yeah. So it's a responsibility of the company to set expectations clear, and then you need to implement and take care of how you want to do this every day. How can leaders show that they care about cybersecurity compliance, how that they discuss with their team? So let's see. So what are the most pressing potential risks that we have in our field, and how do we want to deal with it? And how can, and for the leaders, it's especially important that they create again this psychological safety, that people know that can come to you and speak up if either they see a problem or they have a concern or they observed something, and they will know that it's safe and worthwhile, that they will not harm their career and something will happening. So that's the most important. It's not something that just pops up by itself. It's something that you need to put some time and effort in if you want to create a integrity culture.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about, I've seen this before in the past in many organizations where something comes along very tempting, and you can see the almost see visibly in people's eyes like their principles crumbling and their integrity in question, and it becomes a dilemma. And with that in mind, like,
Right.
can you tell us more about the dilemma game and how does it help conversations?
Yeah, well, the dilemma game is quite simple. It works with little stories. Like, I'm in the office, I see there is a post-it on my colleague who is on vacation which is obviously his passport. What should I do? And then I have just some multiple choice answers that usually are not ideal. Like, I crumble up the post-it and throw it in the bin. I talk to my boss about this behavior. I do nothing. We can trust each other. Yeah. So these answers are on purpose not ideal, because we then do in these workshops that we have play this in little groups, and everybody has to decide what they would do, and they share all the different perspectives, all the different arguments, and hopefully come up with a better solution. But they work through the different possibilities, the pros and cons, and the most important thing, it's not blaming anybody because it's somebody else's problem, but we need to identify with it, and that sticks very much in their brains, and then you can use it as a card game, but also on slides. So then the next step is, as a company, you can say, in these kinds of cases, we would want you to do this and that. Talk to your colleague first and do a little training on password management, whatever you decide. I don't. It needs to be customized. I don't come in there and tell them this is how you need to do it. It needs to be realistic and a good fit for them. Yeah, and that works very magically, because the moment it's not a super playful play, but if as soon as you say we are playing a game and nobody is blamed, but you make the connection between a dry policy text and a real life messy situation, then everybody is wide awake and they remember their own cases and they share them. And then they see, also my otherwise so perfect colleague had these kind of questions. He didn't really know what to do. And that's super valuable, because then you get insights into what's going on in your company in whatever topic you're using for the game.
What I can see there for sure is, particularly, maybe you've got a policy that maybe isn't doing very well. Maybe people are, out and out breaking the rules, but maybe bending the rules as well.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine that kind of game really encourages grey area thinking.
Yeah.
And helps you identify, actually, this is the weak points in the policy, because people are asking more pertinent questions than usual. So
yeah,
that feels like, to use metaphor, testing a vehicle in a wind tunnel versus testing on a road. Like, there's so much more ambiguity, and I think real world, even if there's simulated situations where people have to talk about it and kind of imprint in their brain, I love that technique. I'll be stealing that for some of my next workshops.
Yeah, it works really always, and it creates this kind of connection where people want to share about these problems, because they usually don't have the safe space to talk about these things. And also, if you just ask them, so tell me about your cybersecurity problems in your daily work, they will not remember. But if you give them some examples, like prompts, they will remember them.
Absolutely. If you're going to use it, Jeff, I'm totally going to use it. So that's definitely something I think would have so many applications to cybersecurity. And just start having those open conversations, creating that safe space in which to have these conversations. Because there's so many cases where, we might be thinking we're doing the right thing by our organization, but quite a lot of the controls you put in place do stop people from doing their day jobs. And that leads to workarounds and things like that. And those workarounds can often be a lot more dangerous than the actual things we're trying to prevent against. So no, I think that the dilemma game would be really great. And on that, if anyone does want to find out anything more about you, where can people find you?
Yes, my website is quite simple. It's Bettina Palazzo in one word, Bettina with 2 T's and Palazzo with 2 Z.com. And of course, I'm a lot on LinkedIn, as you know.
Yeah, you must, listeners, you must follow her because her content is chef's kiss great. I learned a lot, and it was there when I was just like, very, very interesting. I think I'll have to get her on the podcast and share her insights. And I'm really glad we did. This has been a fantastic conversation. There is definitely things that have made my head ping about what I could be applying in my teams going forward. And I'm sure
really
our listeners will too.
Thank you.
That was good fun. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so I think these connections between data privacy and compliance are very close and interesting. I think we can learn a lot from both areas. And that one of my favorite things is connecting different worlds, and we need to do this much more because it's all about collaboration in the end, and we can be much more successful if we do this and not just stay in our little silos and not knowing that somebody else has already found a brilliant solution for my problem.
Oh, precisely. I can't remember the exact details, but there was a big discussion. I think it was on Christian Hunt's podcast. And he was talking about that there is one of the scientists have decided to create a journal, and it's all about failures. So it's about experiments that have failed, because he said he was finding it really hard to publish in the traditional journals his failures. And he thought it was really important to actually communicate that this experiment I did failed. And the idea behind it is don't make the same mistakes I did, because those mistakes are costly, take time, and we're not moving the knowledge needle forward. And I think the idea behind this podcast is to sort of talk about things that have gone right, things that have gone wrong, understanding what can we learn and share from it. And I think that's really important. So I'm very glad that you have shared your expertise with me, Jeff, and our listeners today. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's a wild ride through all the intricacies of power, responsibility and culture within organisations, isn't it?
I loved it, especially our deep dive into the dilemma game. You know I love a good game. And how it can be used to create a culture of integrity and trust and encourage grey area thinking. You really do need to stop writing your passwords on a post-it note, Jeff, though.
Okay. These issues are complex and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. But understanding the nuances can make all the difference in how we approach them and help build a culture of psychological safety, really just to ensure that we don't end up repeating the same mistakes time and time again.
Absolutely, and we'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced similar challenges, and what strategies have worked for you? Let us know and tell us, are you going to play the dilemma game for yourself?
Links to everything Bettina discussed in this episode can be found in the show notes. And if you like the show, please do leave us a review and a share on LinkedIn or in your teams. It really helps us spread the word and get high quality guests like Bettina on in future episodes. Leanne, what have we got next week?
Well, next week we say goodbye to Git Blame as we build a collaborative, secure software development lifecycle with Director of Engineering and host of the Train to Code show, James Charlesworth.
Oh, bye Git Blame. Hello, good AppSec.
Indeed, you will not want to miss that one. But in the meantime, we shall see you next time. Remember to keep secure, and don't forget to ask yourself, am I the compromising position here?